Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the Tories' role in the terror attacks sweeping parts of the country as the Conservatives' own advisor on both social cohesion and counter-extremism has said that the failures of the Tory government in ignoring gaps in the law allowed the far right to foment violence online. But first, as we're going to be discussing yet another toxic legacy left to us by the Tories, which Labour will now have to clear up as a matter of urgency, it's worth noting the difference between the way the two parties have been behaving the last week. I'm actually going to discuss how this might actually, if we're lucky, jolt the Conservative Party into waking up from its stupor, as leadership contenders days later finally started to disown the violence we're now seeing. In fact, Priti Patel arguably being the most explicitly opposed to any notion that these far-right groups behind the attacks have got any justifiable reason for doing so. But I'm aiming to discuss that maybe in more detail at a later date. It can wait. For now, I would say there's been a notable difference in the party politics where this emergency is concerned. You look at the senior Labour leadership, they're completely focused on what needs to happen pragmatically to end the violence, strong emphasis on the deterrent effect of making sure those caught even if that involvement is incitement online. We've now started to see some people being going through the court system for their online activities, facing swift justice. That means quick trials, harsh prison sentences as a warning to others. The sentences are going to seem very harsh, especially for children who've been involved in the violence. But the CPS are making the point that people have had their houses and businesses attacked. There was a cafe owner in Belfast whose premises were just completely destroyed. It's heartbreaking to see people's lives, innocent people's lives have been broken. And for what? Mindless violence. So the sympathy for those who committed those acts of violence is going to drain away. The public are not going to have a lot of sympathy for those now in line for severe custodial sentences. The damage the perpetrators did to lives and communities is horrendous. And think about the people who are now living in fear of further attacks for nothing more than their religion or the colour of their skin, or just the fact they've been fleeing persecution or war in their own land. The asylum seekers fearing reprisals are the most vulnerable at all. They're not, although the local community, the people try to make them feel welcome, they're relatively isolated. But we all know that there are people who have played a conscious part in creating the conditions for this violence who will never have to prepare for a life in prison. Many in politics and the media who fanned the flames will not fear the police feeling their colours. They know they haven't committed a criminal offence. They've committed moral offences, but it's not illegal. The Conservative Party, though, should take a good, long, hard look at itself. It allowed their own Home Secretary to say that too much attention was being paid to far-right extremism when we have their own counter-extremism advisor, or former one, saying you didn't pay enough attention. That Home Secretary who used de-humanising language about asylum seekers, in fact, many MPs in the party did. They coined the term illegal immigrant when they knew full well there was nothing illegal about their entry to the UK. There will be no criminal consequences for what they've done, but they should at least do the decent thing and change their language and attitude now. And although I single out the Conservatives for their role in this, there are others who should be reflecting as well. I'll say the Labour MP for Tamworth, Sarah Edwards, was only days ago speaking at a hotel which houses asylum seekers and talking about wanting our hotel back. Now, okay, what she was trying to do was talk about the fact that because the Tories didn't deal with asylum claims, you had this huge backlog dealt. If you dealt with claims properly, there's no need to house asylum seekers in hotels. The point she was making is Labour are going to sort this out now. We're going to manage the asylum process properly, and then this won't happen. But even before these riots, we all knew what you absolutely do not do is highlight the location of a hotel used to house asylum seekers. We know they're targets. Before these riots, we still knew they were targets. For an MP of any party to do that was insane. And then given the events of the past few days, in hindsight, to then not even apologise when that hotel wasn't just a target, it was actually firebombed and has racist graffiti sprawled all over it in very poor taste. I mean, there's a lot of emphasis on the hotel that was targeted in Rotherham, which is much closer to me. The one in Tamworth was really gutted. The attack was much worse there. I mean, she didn't cause the damage. She didn't incite the violence. She didn't want the hotel attacked. I'm sure it would still have been attacked had she not made her little speech last week. They knew about it. But she looked like she wasn't all that bothered about the bullseye being painted on it. For that, she should have apologised. But senior members of the Conservative Party, not just the odd backbencher, senior members, including shadow ministers and leadership contenders, they tried making this a way of scoring party political points straight away. I think some of them have reined back a little bit now. But we had some leadership hopefuls attacking Labour's response to the riots without bothering to say what they objected to, including Priti Patel herself early on. We then had a shadow minister a few days later who justified the attacks before then being forced to apologise publicly. Labour could have more credibly attacked the Tories if they wanted to score political points. They could have bemoaned the lack of resourcing in the police force after 14 years of savage cuts, or the criminal justice system. But what Labour don't want to do is draw attention to that, because that's a way of letting the rioters think they might get away with it. They want to actually present the message, no, we do have the resources for this, even though they sort of know those resources should be much better. They could have said that having a Home Secretary in Suella Braverman using de-humanising language about both Muslims and asylum seekers has created the conditions for violent expressions of hate against the victims. They could have said that not dealing with the asylum process properly allowed the visible signs of frustration, the boat crossings, the hotel accommodation being used. They could have attacked the Conservatives for closing down over half of all the magistrates' courts in England and Wales. Those magistrates' courts are now running 24/7, trying to deal with these cases now. Well, we used to have double the number of those courts. There's a whole list of ways in which the Tories provably left us less well equipped to deal with this. But they haven't. The Labour leadership has focused their blame on those directly responsible now, with indirect causes left until later at least. They've focused on presenting the message that the reaction will be swift and robust. It's worth noting that Labour were constructive in supporting the Conservatives on security issues in opposition. The Conservatives might want to realise that the public expect the same to be true with the shoe on the other foot. It's possible they're realising this. As I say, there has been a noticeable little shift from some senior Tories. I don't think they've necessarily run to the other side. I think they've just started to show a little bit more thought now. But although Labour are doing the right thing by focusing on their job in government, I can certainly talk about how this is yet another example of the scorched earth the Tories left the grown-ups to deal with, and how they made it as difficult as possible to do that. Because apart from anything else, and party politics aside, it is offensive to me that the Tories are complaining about an emergency which they know they allowed the conditions for, because their own advisor said so. She's said so publicly now. So that means she's been telling them for the years. And that some of their own number actively encouraged for political gain. It's like listening to someone who egged on an arsonist, whining that the fire brigade are taking too long to arrive. But one thing that is worth pointing out is this person. So someone who advised Theresa May and Boris Johnson on counter-extremism and Rishi Sunak on social cohesion has laid out exactly what we're seeing, that it was allowed to happen because the Tories in government just didn't take it seriously. Dame Sarah Khan said they saw political advantage in using the culture wars. That's what she's saying. Now, plenty of people have said this, of course, but it's much more powerful when it's said by someone who was so trusted by 3 recent Tory prime ministers on the issue that they hired her to advise. So there can be no accusation of, oh, this is just tribal political attacks. No, this is someone who was hired by 3 Tory prime ministers to advise them on these issues. And she's clearly making the case. They completely ignored her. Of course, I've often said myself that although the Tories indeed did see political advantage in stoking these culture wars, they were wrong. They didn't get any advantage from it. I would say it hurt them very badly. I would say they're going around now having had their faces eaten by the face-eating leopard, because it allowed the rise of Reform UK. The Tories hurt themselves with the culture wars, failing to understand that the far-right extremists were a threat to them, not an asset. In 2023, the then Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, said there'd actually been too much emphasis on tackling far-right extremism. I think events have proven that notion completely wrong. Even now, those of her views complain about the so-called 2-tier policing. Oh, what about the pro-Palestinian marches they will? What about them? They organised their marches in coordination with the police. They stuck to the routes agreed with the police. They didn't torch or smash up buildings. They didn't try to burn people alive. They didn't smash people's houses in. They didn't launch missiles at the police, members of the public, or statues. Yes, we know there were a minority there who weren't there peacefully. A very small number were intimidating others based on race. Nobody is saying that everyone on the left or even far left is squeaky clean, least of all me. I've called it out before. And, you know, it's not that all the wrong ones are on the right. But those criminals can be dealt with as small pockets of individuals. Let us not forget it was the Tories in government at the time who organised police guidance, not Labour. So if you've got any complaint about their treatment, that was under a Tory government. It was Suella Braverman who was running the police at the time, albeit for not much longer afterwards. But it was her guidance which was in place. There is no two-tier policing in this context. Where there is two-tier policing, we know that the Met especially, but policing in general, in England and Wales at least, is institutionally racist. We know that. We know it fails to protect women. We know that it suppresses attempts at whistleblowing, leading to horrendous crimes being committed by officers who could and should have been identified earlier. What there is not is an unfairly harsh treatment of the far right. In fact, they've been given an easy ride, being allowed to coordinate acts of violence without any serious national strategy for dealing with it. These riots were well organised. You cannot coordinate people on this scale in so many places at once. Anyone who's been involved in any sort of campaign or to get a march for anything together knows it's incredibly complicated to get so many people in so many different places at the same time on message. You cannot do that in a short time. You need infrastructure building up over a long time there. It needs to be well funded. Where's that funding coming from? This has been planned for a very long time. The government should have been directing law enforcement to not allow the far right to establish such sophisticated infrastructure. The Labour government will certainly work on dismantling it once the immediate emergency is passed. Not a single rioter got stamped in the head by the police, though. A dog bit one on the arse, that's about it. And he didn't half cry about it in court. Literally cried in court. Like any bully, as soon as they see some consequences, turn on the waterworks, because most bullies are essentially spineless cowards. You don't get people wearing iconography associated with the far right or carrying cans of lager disproportionately stopped and searched by the police on the streets. Even after this, you will not see someone on the street with a can of Heineken, police going up to them, oh, you might be a thug, I'll stop and search you. That doesn't happen. We don't even have them called out for what they are. Too much of the media is still calling them demonstrators or protesters. More are starting to fold in the word rioter here and there, while still talking about protests in the main body of their articles. But if a lone guy who isn't white destroys or even attempts to destroy a building, the media will instantly label them as a terrorist. Oh, it'll be a terrorist attack, no question, before they even know the facts of the matter. But if a large group of feckless white men actually destroys multiple buildings, intimidates communities, specifically to make a political point, which is the legal definition of terrorism, and in some cases actually intend murder on people within those buildings, right? Oh no, they can still be protesters. No. And although the Tories are not directly causing these riots, they consciously allowed the conditions to emerge by which they became almost inevitable. And after the initial emergency is over and the work on dismantling the environment which allowed it to begin in the first place begins, I would suggest the post-election Conservative Party have got a choice. They can either get with the programme and support the efforts to take apart the apparatus used by the far right to promote and carry out violence, realise that actually these people are no friends of theirs. Because the thing with extremists, left or right, the thing with extremists, you will never please them. You can never appease them. Because what they want is so pure, their ideology is so pure, you cannot possibly, you could meet 95% of their demands and they still won't be happy. And if you were to satisfy 100% of their demands, everyone else would be unhappy. So you cannot win. You cannot win enough votes to form a government by appeasing extremists. And they should realise that. You know, they should realise that. They should tackle those in their own party who are part of it, which is something that would also benefit them politically because the thugs are no help to them in an election. Or expect to be called out for not only having ignored the danger for years, even tried to use it for their own ends, but continuing to try to make use of it for their own political advantage, a political advantage that will never emerge. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe for further content and click the like button. You can also sign up for memberships if you'd like to support the channel further. Thanks for watching. Until next time, I'll see you later.